Hello and welcome to Nocab Game Design. In this episode, I'm asking some fundamental, basic questions about Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. In this episode specifically, I'm asking, why do the developers include the wolf form? Now, while this is a simple question, it's not really simple or easy to answer. Any why question about game designers is hard to tell unless you ask the designers themselves. But I'm going to ask some leading questions throughout this episode and try and unpack my reasons why I think the developers included the wolf form in this game. This is the only Legend of Zelda game that features a wolf form Link, so they must have good reasons for breaking the mold and doing something different compared to all of the other successful games in the series. In order to answer this question, I have some other supporting questions that I need to ask and answer first. Questions like, what does the wolf form do to gameplay? Are there any pros and cons of including a wolf form? And how does the wolf form compare and contrast to the human form? Does it allow the developers to do anything differently gameplay-wise? So with all of these questions asked and not a lot of answers to be found yet, let's play. But first, before I can get into some heavy-duty compare and contrast analysis of the wolf form gameplay, we need to talk a little bit about what the gameplay actually is in this section of the game. At this part, Link has entered Kakariko Village and has been tasked by this spirit god to fill another vessel of light. In order to do this, Link needs to explore the entire area, both the village and some of the surrounding load zones, and find and kill these evil bug things and retrieve the light. This is a fetch quest. Now, it's a really well-designed fetch quest, but it's still a fetch quest through and through. This is the task for the player, the motivation of play. Go through and explore this abandoned or semi-abandoned village. This is pretty reasonable game design. As soon as a player enters a new area, their first natural instinct is to explore anyways. Might as well encourage and reward the player for doing that by giving them an official task to explore the area. Also, with this mission profile, the developers can mark out specific places that they want the players to explore. This way, the developers can ensure that the player has been at least exposed to important locations like the store or the save points or wherever characters are in order to discuss and get new missions or whatever it is that the developers want to draw the player's attention to. But the mission profile is not the main point of this video. The question I want to ask is, why do the developers make the player do this exploration in wolf form? It seems like it would make a lot of sense. If you're exploring a village, a place that is designed for humans to walk around, you would want human form Link to do the exploration. That way, human form Link can do things like talk to people or even open doors. Some of these small side alleyways are difficult for the large, fast-moving wolf to turn around in and move in delicate, precise motions. This area is not designed for a giant wolf to be scampering around in. So why are the developers forcing the player to explore this area in wolf form? And to be honest, I think all the reasons are exactly what I just said. All the reasons why it would be easier in human form means that it's better to make the player do it in wolf form. If Link was in human form, then they could talk to all the people in this area, and the player might get distracted or bogged down talking to every individual person and miss the forest for the trees. If the player could simply walk up to every door and open the door, that's not really a sense of adventure and exploration, that's just a fetch quest. In wolf form, the player has to find alternate entrances to every single building. Jump on top of it and break in through the roof, or dig a hole and get in through the basement. This is much more exciting. It's unusual for a player who is a human to explore a city this way. Traveling through the village in wolf form is more difficult, but that's what makes it more enjoyable. It is an unusual experience, still a well-polished experience, but an unusual one, and that is compelling. Another reason why doing these fetch quests in wolf form is because the wolf has higher base movement speed. there are a couple of these seeds of light that are kind of way out of the way. And walking through these, let's be honest, kind of empty zones can be quite boring. The player will definitely appreciate a little extra speed during the exploration part. Because again, there's not really much to do other than walk and run around. Another important design decision that the developers have made is that during the fetch quest section, the town is completely overrun by monsters. These monsters represent the texture or gameplay of this area. Because just a simple fetch quest with a little exploration isn't enough, you need to have a little interactivity in each area. The wolf is very good at combat. Now, the human form is also kind of good at combat, but the wolf doesn't really offer much else other than combat. That's all that the wolf can do. There's no tools, no slingshots, no grappling hook, there's no other affordances or toys available to wolf form. It's just quick movement, combat, and I suppose the wolf also has this sense ability to find hidden items and enemies. So comparing the wolf form and the human form, the wolf is kind of lacking some key affordances. So to complement the wolf's limited affordances, the developers fill this area with monsters. When human form link comes around after the exploration is complete, all of the monsters are gone. And instead, the texture of this area, the interactivity, is provided by other metagame mechanics. Things like shops, warp zones, or quest givers. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the wolf form link is much less complicated than the human form link. And that means the developers have to try and build more simple locations and zones and mission for the wolf form than they can for the human form. Now, in previous episodes, I've talked a lot about the skill formula and the driving theory behind it of flow theory. Those conceptual models of game design strongly recommend that the developers start off with the more simple zones and then add complexity later. And so it makes sense. The first time the player is exploring this area, they are in the simpler wolf form, and the zone is a little bit simpler to compensate for that. After the player has explored the entire area sufficiently, or demonstrated mastery of understanding the local map, then they're allowed to use their human form, which has more affordances and more tools available to them, but also more complicated game areas. Meta mechanics or hidden collectibles or various other odds and ends that were not available to the wolf form. This is excellent game design. The developers are reusing Kakariko Village and forcing the player to basically go through it 2 times. Normally, I would say that's bad design, but the developers here reinvent this zone with each exploration. At the beginning of this video, one of the questions I asked is, does the wolf form allow the developers to do anything different gameplay-wise? And the answer is a resounding yes. Because it is simpler, or more specifically, it offers different strengths and weaknesses than the human form, the developers are able to create 2 completely different gameplay experiences in the same location. Because the wolf form has natural strengths and weaknesses to the human form, the developers design an experience that either maximizes or minimizes those strengths and weaknesses. The wolf moves faster, so it's an exploration mission, which allows the player to quickly cover more ground. The wolf can't open doors, which also encourages players to find alternative and other creative ways to explore the city. And the wolf can't really communicate with humans. That means the player isn't going to get bogged down deciding whether or not they want to buy a new shield, and only focus on exploration. To summarize and generalize this video, it's difficult to pull general advice about this area that can be applied to a wide variety of games, because most games don't have multiple forms for the player to take. But if your game does offer different forms to the player, or different loadouts, or various different changes to the fundamental affordances available to a player, then consider reusing a single level asset, but having it fill a different role in your gameplay loop, depending on which mode that the player is in. In Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, Kakariko Village in Wolf mode is effectively a dungeon for the player to explore, complete with combat and monsters and trapdoors and secrets. But the same location in human form is a save point, a place to spend rupees and resources, or find out about the next quest. Part of the reason why I believe Twilight Princess to be a masterpiece game is because the developers are so effective at constantly reusing location assets and reinventing the gameplay depending on what's going on. The novelty in a lot of this game is not necessarily the zone that the player is in, but what they are doing in that zone. In this way, the player explores and re-explores and then returns to again with new affordances to further finally totally explore a zone over and over and over again. This makes the game world feel more rich, more alive, and much larger than it actually really is. And honestly, any game that can successfully tell the players to go do a fetch quest and the player is excited about it, I would consider that to be a good game. In the next episode, Link gets a pair of heavy iron boots and challenges a Goron to a sumo wrestling match. I'll see you there.